Are you done? Because I wanted to ask Tommy.
Oh, wow.
No.
Okay.
I didn't mean to sound abrupt.
Yes, I'm done. No.
Tommy.
You can never sound abrupt.
Okay, Tommy, how are you doing?
Yeah.
I'm good. I'm really good. I had a great workout today.
Oh, nice.
And
Today was leg day, yeah?
leg day, yep.
I could
I
tell.
did 6 things.
For those
legs,
of you who can't see, Tommy came in with some really tiny shorts.
and they're colorful.
Boom, waka, 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 boom. Boom, waka, waka.
Someone texted me at the gym, oh, that leg work's really working out for you.
Oh, nice.
Someone that I know. And I was like, oh, where is, I started looking around and like he had left already, but it's interesting. You never know who's watching.
Are you trying to have
today.
sex?
Yeah, I was like, are you leading us up to today's topic? Is that what's happening?
Exactly.
Well, the gym can be a place of triggers. Yeah,
it can be a place for sex addicts. Well, that's a very smooth segue to today's topic. So today's topic is we're talking about sex addiction, but sex addiction is actually not technically a term that's used to like diagnose anyone. The actual term that's generally used in medical and psychiatric spaces is compulsive sexual behavior disorder or hypersexuality. So just some quick facts about sex addiction or compulsive sexual behavior. I think for the sake of brevity in today's pod, today's episode, I'm just going to call it sex addiction. So statistics say that between 3 to 6% of people have compulsive sexual behavior. And there are other stats that say that's a lot higher. There's also very mixed feelings and information about this. There's some camps that say sex addiction is not a thing, and there are other camps that say it is a thing. Right. For the sake of today's conversation, we're going to be talking about sexual behaviors or ideas or practices that interfere with a person's life that might, have them reflect on themselves and think, well, maybe I might actually have a problem here. One of the things that I think I also want to emphasize is that today's episode is not to villainize sexual behavior at all. This episode is about giving folks more information about what sexual addiction, compulsive sexual behavior looks like, and whether or not this is like something you might need help with or not need help with, and maybe it's just information.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, well, first off, Tommy, we brought you on because tell us a little bit about why you agreed to come on today's show.
Well, when I heard the topic of sex addiction, I thought, well, I could speak on that because I've been in SAA, a member of Sex Addicts Anonymous, for almost 5 years now, and it's saved my life. I'll have to say that after acting out sexually, ongoing for a length of time, days in a row, weeks in a row, I felt suicidal. And I never, I'm also what they call a double winner. I'm in a different fellowship for crystal meth addiction at CMA. And I never really felt like taking my life in CMA when I was in my heaviest addiction. But with my sex addiction, it was really interesting. So yeah, it could bring me to a very dark place, and that's why I went out and sought help.
Yeah, Louis, do you have what are your thoughts? Before we jump in.
No, I'm just listening. I'm listening. So what I was going to say when you said, we're not trying to villainize, and it's right. Sex and good sex is God given or higher power given.
That's right.
And I think that when it's done in a healthy way, it's supposed to kind of add to, not take away.
That's right. Right. So that, that brings me to this idea of that whether or not this is, sex addiction or compulsive sexual behavior is an issue of ideology, or is it really an issue of science? Right. So, like, for example, the Center for Positive Sexuality says there is no such thing as sex addiction. This is an issue of ideology. And a common study that's cited is, I don't have it with me, but I'll give you some of my citations, my sources later, but they looked at the brains of, say, alcoholics, right, and drug addicts. And they looked at their brains and they saw that there were certain things that were firing off. And then they gave that same test to people who were identifying as sex addicts, and they did not see those same things firing off. Right. So, that isn't to say that maybe they're not the same functions. Maybe it's not the same thing. Maybe it was the nature of the study. But that's I should have more studies to talk about this, not just this one. But the point is that there are there are divergent opinions about what that might look like.
I know for me that watching porn fired up all these neutrons in my head and my brain, and it gave me the same feeling as if I was on crystal meth at times, when I was watching porn addictively, to the point where if I didn't have lube, I was bleeding from masturbating and edging for so long.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely plays a part in brain chemistry. I don't know, I guess one study could be one study, and then there's other studies out there like you were mentioning.
You're right. I maybe for another episode I'll bring some other stuff.
It's the same, like there are folks who still think that climate
right, like, exactly. But I brought up the one I brought up the one just to give it like some comparison. But yeah, some of the common symptoms that are like an intense preoccupation with sex, right? So, or it could be impulsive or compulsive sexual behaviors, or it can be sexual behaviors that lead to negative consequences, or there's like a loss of control, right? So, with pornography, it could be like, one of the other things too that I think is important to talk about, like when we're talking about addiction, is like one is not enough, and 1,000 is too many.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's, like it's sometimes I think about like compulsive sexual behavior. And I, for example, there was that one time I was out to the diner and like one of the guys was like playing porn on his phone. And I was like, what the fuck? We're at a diner, And he says to me, I think I might have. He's like, I used to think that I have a sex addiction, but it doesn't really interfere with my life. But meanwhile, like I'm thinking about this person, I'm like, yeah, but every time I talk to you, you're always on Grindr. You're always on your way to go hook up with someone. Your life is really stressful and you're like doing all this. And that's not judgment, but I was just like looking at it from the outside. The other thing that I noticed too is like the difference between, and this is written about in like cruise control, for example, like the difference between intensity and intimacy. Right. And how a lot of like compulsive sexual behaviors are about intensity, right? It's about like checking out. It's about numbing. It's about chasing like a really good feeling about like feeling elevated or having like an altered state. Go ahead. You were going to say?
So your definition, the definitions used for sex addiction can be used for all addictions.
Right. 100%.
Like the whole idea is like, it's not about what I'm doing. It's why I'm doing it. It's like and that's, I was thinking about this because, how this disease is very insidious because, like, okay, great, I come in needing to deal with my crystal meth because it's the thing that's most obvious to me,
right? And
I deal with that, but other things like the sex and the food and other things creep up. And what's tough with that is because of these varying ideologies about it. Like, I may struggle with the idea of saying that I have a sex addiction because I like sex so much and I don't want to let go of it,
right? Right. Well, that's interesting because there's this one. Tommy, I'm sorry, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
No, I just was listening actually.
Okay, so I was thinking about like for example, when we talk about like what is the difference between say having a high sex drive and like sex addiction, right? And I think one of the distinction is like I love what you said, Louis, about like relating it to other addictions, which is in this case you can do that too. It's like, can you stop? Like, can you for example go 30 days without like opening up Grindr or watching pornography, or can you stay away from sexually explicit content for like 30 days, right? Like, so this idea of like, or if you're in like mid-cycle, can you like postpone it? Can you avoid it? Can you does it feel like it's out of your control, and then you were also talking about like if you are like you're basically not being satisfied, right? So you can keep going at it and keep going at it and keep going at it, and then like the satisfaction dwindles.
And with the nearly 5 years that I've been in SAA, I've learned a lot about like what might trigger someone. We have something called the 3-second rule, where you just are not supposed to like objectify someone, and you count to 3, and you have to turn your head away. Like some people in the fellowship of SAA or sex addicts, people that identify as sex addicts, they follow people down the street. They spend not only hours upon hours at a bathhouse, but days. And it's incredible. how much a person can get absorbed into that. And if it's compulsive and obsessive, then I consider that addiction, you know. And like Lewis was saying, with addiction, it rears its ugly head, and it could be, you know, you stop crystal meth and then you start eating, you know, gallons of ice cream per night, or your sex addiction fires up. But the one thing I heard it be said in the past is that you should tackle each addiction in what's going to kill you first. So crystal meth was it for me. But that being said, crystal meth and sex addiction was intertwined. And it is for so many people. Especially the LGBTQ plus community has been hit quite hard by the meth addiction and meth and sex. I'll be honest, I get on Grindr. You mentioned Grindr earlier, and there's a lot of people there that are, you know, that could probably use the help of 12 steps or any help, really. And I have it on my profile. No PMP, no partying, and it doesn't always help.
No, I don't like. It's a sidebar, but I don't really trust that or myself on there. So it is purely entertainment. If I've not met you in person, I'm probably not going to meet you through that, just because you like when I was in my active addiction, you can tell certain behavior or whatever. It's like this is probably another topic about how people present, you know, on those sites. But yeah, I'll hold my thought and come back to it. I'll put it in the parking lot.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Tommy.
I was just thinking there's a lot of sex addicts on those apps. And addicts in general. I mean, on their phones, and it's really hard to put down your phone or computer. I had to dismantle my computer after watching porn for so many hours that, like I mentioned earlier, I would bleed because I didn't think I had the wherewithal. And this is sober, without crystal meth. Once I discovered that my brain would fire up by watching this image on a screen the same way as if I hit a crystal meth pipe, not to trigger anyone.
That's okay.
And it was just shocking. And eventually I had to start taking my computer apart. And I have fellows in SAA who have to put their phone in the cupboard underneath food in the kitchen, then go to bed. There's just a lot of tricks, and it's real sex addiction.
Yeah, no, I agree. I was thinking about like my own behaviors, and part of like, so I've been in SLAA, so Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, and I've talked about it on the show before. And part of the frustration for me is like, so I don't want to, I don't want to like criticize anybody else's behavior, right? Like I certainly have like my history. There were times where like I would literally binge, you know, I would hook up with like hella people in a day. And there were times where like I could not go to bed because I couldn't get off the app, you know, or there were times where like I would travel to specific locations just so that I could hook up. And I was preoccupied, and it was taking up a lot of mental space, and one wasn't enough, you know. And one of the things that I came across and like preparing for the show is that for a lot of people, like the actual act of sex itself is not as fulfilling as like the chase of like the going through things, right? And there are studies that show, that like the same kind of the same neural networks that fire, like dopaminergic networks that fire when people are gambling show up when you're on an app, you know, and you like get a hit, you know. And so that gets very complicated for me because, for example, we're in the Castro and there's a lot of sexuality in the Castro. Everywhere I turn, there's like a fake dick in the window, or there's like a picture of someone who's half naked on a thing, and like and I get really frustrated because I'm like, sometimes like I've talked about this before. Am I a bad gay that like there's a part of me that's like, God, like why does it always have to be around? And I'm like, maybe that's my problem because I'm the.
I don't think that's the reason why you're a bad gay. I couldn't help it.
you know, and I also think about like the nature of my work, and I'm committed to I'm committed to helping improve the mental health of LGBT plus people. And so, you know, I think like I have skin in the game, you know, and so I think about that. Like I think a lot about like, well, you know, should I be more open to the way like sexuality is displayed? But then I also think about a lot, like as a clinician, I think about a lot of like the issues that most of the gay men I've ever spoken to deal with, you know, and there are issues of like self-esteem and compulsive sexual behavior, and there's that fear of intimacy, or like all of these different things that I see people try to kind of like quiet with sex or pornography, right? Go
Yeah.
ahead.
You know what's interesting? You had mentioned earlier, I think it was before we were actually going but on, but there seems to be something, at least within me, which wonders like, what is healthy sexuality? And I try also not to judge other people. There's Sober Kink Together, a meeting, and they're very open about like Thursday night is bathhouse night, and things that I know that I wouldn't be able to do. If they're very gun ho about, and I don't go to this meeting, but I've gone before years ago, and it just seems to me like it's a lot about promoting and helping you have sober sex, and there's that saying, you could do anything sober that you could have done when you were high. And I think that goes for fisting, or, you know, any kind of kink or fetish that you may have. And it took a while for me to accept that everyone, you know, has their own path and journey to go on.
Right.
Yeah. I think that like what you were talking about the sexuality and like the intent, I almost feel like it is a conversation that needs to happen, and I feel like that we need to be a little more responsible, and I include myself, because it's so easy, you know, if I don't have the issue, not to take into consideration sometimes that somebody might be struggling with it. And like even something as simple or as, in my mind, harmless as flirting. Flirting can be triggering, and it is important to be mindful. And the group, the Sober Kink group, I think they're great. I think they're great, especially when they're really being mindful about the folks showing up, because I struggle, and I'm sure a lot of people do, with, it took me a while to say, okay, you know what, I'm uncomfortable with this. I'm not ready for this. This is not right. This is not where I'm at. I mean, because we're adults, and I don't know, maybe in my mind I'm expecting myself to be okay and not have issues with these things, and maybe it brings on shame and discomfort, or feelings of whatever those feelings are. But yeah,
as a sex addict, I even felt jealousy, you know, like, oh, they can go into a bathhouse and they could say enough is enough, you know, maybe because they're not getting high on meth anymore, but they're exploring their sexuality. But if I was to go to the bathhouse, you know, who knows when I'd leave? Maybe in a year.
Well,
or
after
two.
8 hours.
In a year or two.
After 8 hours, because they limit it to 8 hours.
Oh, okay, you would know.
Yeah.
I would.
Yeah. You know, you know, I've had those. I've had that. I've thought about that too, right? Where it's like, are like my issues, like, for example, I have a friend who, one of the things that I noticed is that they aren't able to make certain commitments, and like their meeting attendance seems a little weird, but yet they make a lot of time for hooking up, and they make a lot of time for trips that tend to be sexually charged. And, you know, I look at this and I think to myself, you know, this is someone who, you know, at first blush appears to be embracing their sexuality. And then there's another part of me that's like, or are they trading one addiction for another? Right. And I see that a lot, like in the rooms, you know, like, are we, in some cases, are people trading one addiction for another? And is it the lesser of the evils, you know? And it is the lesser of the evils, you know, like the health argument has often been used to like attack gay men, you know, for example, like when we had like the HIV/AIDS epidemic, right? Or then there was monkeypox, for example, and like, oh, well, it's men's compulsive sexual behavior that is leading to these things. And I think, well, that's just like one way of trying to kind of like control and categorize a group, is like to blame them for something like that. But yeah, I am often torn about it, and one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently has been like this idea of intensity versus intimacy. Like when I was acting out sexually, is that what I was doing? Was I chasing intensity? And I think a lot of the times I was trying to check out. Or when I've watched pornography, it was because I was trying to check out. It was seldom the case that like I don't know, like had like a subtle compulsion, or like I was like horny and then like went and like hopped on an app or something like that. Like it was normally not just that simple. There was always other stuff going on.
In SAA, Sex Addicts Anonymous, I identify as a sex addict, but there are people that identify, when they raise their hand and like they'll say, "I'm Jake. I'm an intimacy avoidant."
Right.
And I've grown and grown a lot and got to see a lot of people and shares and listen, and a lot of people do have, including me, intimacy issue. So it numbs you out when you're acting out in your inner circle, which I was going to talk about circles a little later, maybe.
Yeah, sure. We can talk about we'll talk about interventions in a little bit.
Hey, so
Go ahead.
okay, so I remember like when I first started drinking, before, like there was a point in my drinking, and I know now that I'm like alcoholic through and through, but there's a point where I really was a problem drinker. And I'm mentioning this because it's like how, when you have an individual, like I have moments where like I will lean heavily into sex and whatever, but pull back. And I have this thing in my sexual idea that says it's like I want to feel dirty during, I don't want to feel dirty after, meaning like I don't get myself into situations and that caused me to feel uncomfortable about or question how I was showing up. But it's like it's a fine kind of line, like for me, I don't believe that I have an addiction to sex. I think that my relationship with sex was, or the unhealthy version of it was tied to my relationship with crystal meth. And as soon as like I was able to kind of break free from crystal meth, and I was able to get a handle, but every now and then it creeps up, and I'm able to kind of have a conversation and come back, but it creeps up and comes back, and I'm like thinking, is it something, for our listeners, is that something I need to be concerned about?
Yeah. So I wanted to read like some of the symptoms that are like written out. So you have, for example, like your sexual impulses lead to repetitive sexual activities that are rarely satisfying. So you always want more. Or you focus on sexual behaviors might lead you to face conflicts at work or in your relationships or within yourself, right? Or you might experience guilt and shame that you can't stop some of your sexual behaviors, right? And then you have stuff from the ICD-11, which says being focused mainly on sexual activities, leading you to lead other aspects of your life unattended to, or including personal care, engaging in repetitive sexual activities and fantasies that often cannot be stopped at will or controlled, experiencing little to no satisfaction from performing some of these sexual activities. And then the last one is experiencing significant distress and conflicts in your life due to your sexual urges and behaviors. Right. So, I mean, these are like the clinical things, but I think like as a sober person, I think about the way that like the madness it creates in my brain, like when, like when I doom scrolling late at night. That's when I knew I had a fucking problem. When I was like,
what's doom scrolling?
Doom scrolling is when like doom scrolling generally refers to like maybe being on Instagram or Reddit, where you just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and you're like reading a bunch of horrible things and blah, blah, blah. But I would do something really similar when I was on like any of the hookup apps, that I would stay on those apps and I'd be talking to hello people, and I'd be like arranging people, and like it just would get out of control for me. And one of the things that I was reading, and we can go back to what you were going to say, is that so there's this. So I want to cite some of my articles. So I've read some stuff from Good Therapy. Then there's some stuff from the Buy-In Therapy group. There's Psych Central, and then of course the DSM-5 and the ICD. So the ICD is the International Classification of Diseases, which is what's used to diagnose, and then the DSM is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual 5, which is what psychologists use to diagnose and treat. Okay, so what I was thinking about that feels like a little conflicting for me was so there's this great article. It's called Intensity versus Intimacy. It's by this guy named Dan Drake. He's from the Buy-In Therapy group. And he talks about, and I want to hear what you both think about this. So he says, here's how I understand sex addiction. It's a deep hunger for intimacy, but a terror of it at the same time. Sex addiction is an intimacy disorder. What we truly crave is connection, intimacy, peace, love, value, purpose, validation. Right. And so I'm interested in what y'all think about this, and if our listeners have any ideas, because there's a part of me that's like, yeah, but I think I know people who like don't want intimacy and they don't want connection and they just want to get off. And that to me is really conflicting because, well, anyway, I'll stop there. I'm wondering what the two of you think.
I feel like I can connect or I can appreciate that, because like in what he was saying, it's like, they're in search of intimacy, these things, what have you. And when you are doing it compulsively and you're trying to get it from anywhere or anyone who opened the door, because I think the thing that we have taken into consideration is that just because I want somebody doesn't mean they're going to want me. Mm-hmm. So it's like when I'm just trying to get it and I'm trying not to be alone, what have you. And on to that note about the people just wanting to get off, I think I'm one of those people who kind of like, I'll say I don't want this, but I probably do want this. And the more that I talk about it or say that I don't want it, I might maybe want it. So I think, it's one of those things, how we talk about more will be revealed.
Right.
It may be that you want it and you're not aware that you want it now.
Right.
Because if it's just a matter of getting off and you get off and you're still not satisfied, that's a problem.
Yeah, I've always thought about that with like open relationships, because I've been in open relationships before. Sorry, Tommy, and you'll jump in now. But I've been in open relationships before where what I thought I wanted when I was in an open relationship, I was like, oh, well, the problem here is that I just need to be able to have sex with whoever the hell I want, and like how I show up to my relationship is different. And what I realized was like, actually, no, it wasn't. Like I was always hooking up with someone new. There was always someone new. There was always someone new, right? And so I was like, oh shit, I'm not actually getting what I thought I was going to get from this. Maybe that's different for other people, but that's not what it was for me. I wasn't getting what I thought I was going to get from it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tommy.
For me, I was molested as a child, so intimacy, it kind of, I don't know, it seemed really screwed up in my head, for lack of a better term, and it was really hard for me to be intimate or have sex with someone unless I knew them. So I kind of thought that I needed to be in a relationship in order to have sex, and the older I get, and I'm not a kid anymore, that's for sure. I started realizing that I need to explore just sex. So that's what I've been doing. And I like what you said, Anthony, about like, hooking up with a new person each time, because that's something I need to talk to my sponsor about.
Okay.
I've been hooking up with people, and then sometimes, of course, because you get their phone number and everything, and they'll say something like, hey, can I come over again? That was really fun. And I'm like, oh, but I already
met with someone. Yeah.
I used to say like, I don't do repeats because that's dangerously close to a relationship.
Yeah. So one of the things that this guy writes is he says he talks about like this vicious cycle, and he says after a sexual encounter, we're left more lonely, miserable, shameful, disconnected, and broken than ever. The hunt for intensity is inherently disconnecting rather than connecting. We have to objectify others to engage in these actions, which takes us further from the very intimacy we're longing for. Yet, unfortunately, those promises rear their heads again and even promise us an escape from that shame we're experiencing from the last encounter. So he talked about how, like when we're drinking and using, for example, there's like the promise of relief, right? But like that promise is never filled. And so similarly, it's like the same thing with sex is what he's arguing. One of the things that I wanted to talk about for me was, like, one of the things that was really difficult for me was that, like, because when I was hooking up regularly, like, I had essentially separated in my body, essentially, like sexual pleasure versus like love and intimacy. And what made that very difficult for me in the long term was when I would enter into relationships, it was really hard. Like, once I loved someone, it was very hard for me to be intimate because I had separated those things for such a long time. In fact, there was a time where, like, the second I fell in love with someone, I felt like I couldn't have sex with them anymore. I'm wondering if either one of you have experiences with that.
I don't know, but I was thinking about more about what you read. I feel like okay, so we're in search of intimacy, but what happens if the intimacy that you were, or what you were introduced to was this warped version of it,
Right.
where it was an unhealthy version of it.
Right.
So you're searching for it, or you may be trying to repeat it, and it is not good for you. So of course it's not going. Yeah.
Right.
It's just going to be this big convoluted, like,
right. I feel
mind fuck thing, you know?
right. I feel like we find that with relationships,
Uh-huh.
right? Like when we find ourselves in like an unhealthy relationships, because that's what we've known, you know? So, excuse me, tell me, were you going to say something? No? Okay. So with the time that we have left, maybe we can talk a little bit about, like, what has healthy sexuality looked like for us? Go.
So I was going to mention earlier that there's the 3 circles in Sex Addicts Anonymous, and I think compulsive sexual behavior is defined in the middle circle. I mean, in the inner circle as, for me, it could be different for me than for you.
Sure.
Mine was mostly porn addiction. So for my inner circle, which are things that are unhealthy, I put porn, masturbation, and now, like I mentioned, I'll have to start looking into maybe possibly talking to my sponsor about adding some more things into the inner circle. And then the middle circle is just things that are less destructive, and the outer circle is all the good things in life, your recovery, what works, and could even be a hike or a picnic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when I'm in tune with my sexual idea, and just a reminder, the sexual idea is something that I was able to do within my 4-step with my, like, overall inventory, since last week was our personal inventory. I think that, like, when I believe I'm in my higher power's will and I'm having a good, healthy experience, I'm looking for individuals who, number one, kind of fall close enough within my ideas, and I'm not compromising that. And then I'm showing up, I'm staying present, and I'm participating, and allowing that person to show up and well, not, I don't know if allowing somebody to say, you're not allowing me to do anything, and no, and really kind of enjoying it, and I believe that I can, like, have a healthy like sex life where I can have a lot of sex and be good with it, as long as I am aware and I'm checking my motives. Like why are you doing this? Because if I'm doing it because I'm lonely and whatever, or if I'm not spiritually right, then and the times when I'm there, when I'm present, paying attention, and really trying to support, like, making sure each of us have, like, a great connection. Yeah, that's really hot, and looking for that connection, but that connection in a way that's realistic. Because I always joke and say, I give the boyfriend experience even though I don't want to be in a relationship. That's when I know it's a good, like, we're with each other, experiencing this, and it doesn't matter, we're in the moment.
Yeah. I feel like what's interesting in listening to you, I feel like I'm on the other side of that. Like, I feel like there's so many things I've discovered as a sober person. And one of the things is, like, in early recovery, I was hooking up a lot, and even, like, as early as, like, the last few years, like, I was hooking up a lot. And what I was discovering over time was, like, oh, this is actually not something that I want to do. Like, it was true for me that I would walk away from situations were just feeling really empty, and maybe what happened is, like, over time, what I realized is, like, or maybe I grew into, right, maybe all of that was appropriate for the time. Mm-hmm. And what I've grown into is, like, wanting intimacy and closeness and wanting depth, you know, like wanting to establish something like sacred and meaningful with someone. Where in this case, you know, like I'm not taking my sexuality, I'm conserving my like sexual energy to deepen my relationship with my partner. Which in some ways feels like very radical. Like as a gay man, it feels very radical to say like, well, at this time in my life, I want monogamy, or to say like,
but it's not.
right. I know.
Just it.
Yeah.
I got
So,
you.
but sometimes it feels that way, you know,
Yeah,
like sometimes, sometimes I feel, you know, like, like sometimes it feels really weird. And like, and one of the things that I've had to grow to accept is like, you know what, it's fine that everyone around me, or it seems that everyone around me is in a monogamy, in an open relationship. I just know that's not what I want for myself.
Absolutely.
You know,
and that's the key. It's like, that's key. Figuring that out for you, what it is that you want, knowing what you want. Like, that's a great place to start.
You know, but you know, I have to admit, I feel like part of what's helped me get to that has been that like I was so thoughty for such a long time.
Yeah, but
you know what I mean?
No, but it's like what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like I've got to stumble through the dark to come to where I need to, and to go through that. And so maybe what it is that, like you're saying, as I don't want to judge anybody else's journey to get to where they need to get.
Yeah.
You know, just maybe be a loving support if it is causing them unnecessary hardships, you know?
Right. And like just being real, you know, I think about myself and I look back at that time, and there were certainly like sexual experiences that I had that were like very hot and that were fulfilling, you know. I can remember like I've had several like threesomes or foursomes before, and there was only one or maybe two where I was like, oh, this was cool. You know what I mean? I'm like, I don't hate these people. We're like talking afterward, but it was very seldom, you know? And it's a mixed bag, you know, and I've certainly had experiences where I walked away thinking to myself, what the fuck was that about? You know, and I've had experiences where like I've had, you know, there were some sexual partners that I've had where like there were repeats because it felt safe and it was fine, you know. But let me tell you something that's really interesting about this is that across the board, whenever I was like cooking up, I would say 9 times out of 10, there was always something where like they wanted a little more from me, right? There was like a long, or like maybe I wanted a little more from the other person. And there was always that in the back of my head where I was like, what's happening here, you know? And so I guess what I'm saying is that maybe where I'm at with my sexuality is that like, I've done all of that, you know, like I have had a lot of sex, and I'm at a point now where I'm like, oh, okay. Like now I'm ready for something that feels more meaningful and more and deeper, you know? And I don't know, again, for people listening, if your sex life looks different than mine, that is okay. I am not judging you. I'm just like letting you know, like where I'm at, you know? And
he's floating on a cloud.
Yeah. Well, I'm not. But yeah. So we have 5 minutes left.
I know.
Any closing thoughts?
Yeah. My takeaway today would probably be what Lewis said earlier, which is if sex has you feeling dirty during it and then after it, it's probably not a good idea, unless it's, you know, the kind of dirty that you might want. But
yeah,
I find the chase, like that's another takeaway. The chase always seems to be, like they say, the fantasy is always better than the reality, and finding that balance of like intimacy and sexuality it's a challenge. It's still something I'm exploring, and I think this is a lot of food for thought today, and I really appreciate both of you for being here.
Thank you for coming on and being honest and sharing your story with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I really feel like what we try to do with the podcast, to encourage you to normalize talking about it, and because they're finding whatever avenue that you can to kind of express it, to get it out. Because I think the more that we talk about it and we take the stigma away from what this is, and we just realize that we are human and we're trying to do the best that we can, as our executive director says all the time in his gratitude. We're just trying to do the best that we can.
Everyone's doing the best that they can. Yeah, I want to give credit to some of the sources that I cited today. So there was an article called Intensity versus Intimacy by Dan Drake from the Buy-In Therapy Group. There was also What Are the Symptoms of Sex Addiction? That was medically reviewed by Jennifer Lintner, PhD, LMFT, CST, but was written by Stephanie Oxford. And of course, there was the DSM-5 and the ICD-10. So these were Psych Central. Sex Central was one of the other sources. And Good Therapy. I was also reading stuff from Good Therapy. This is, of course, not an exhaustive conversation about sex addiction. I just want to highlight what Louis said. This is just food for thought, like if it resonates with you, great. If it doesn't, write us and let us know what you think. And maybe we can have a follow-up episode and you can come on and you can tell us what you think.
Yeah.
I think with that, we're ready to close.